Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and in today's video we're going to be tackling Mageblood, the talk of the town, the belt everyone is hyping up. Is it worth the hype? We've seen thumbnails of headhunters in dumpsters. Is it true? Is headhunter just worthless now? Well, let's break it down. So we're going to be going deep into Mageblood. I'm going to tell you exactly how good it is and how good it's going to be and what kind of characters want to use this belt, because I think it is being a little bit oversold. We're going to go into the technicalities of it. Let's get started. So let's do a quick explanation of the belt. Okay, so it's got a bit of dex, it's got a bit of res, that's fine, nothing to write home about. It's going to fix some stats for you. But the real thing here is that your magic utility flasks cannot be used, and the four leftmost utility flasks are permanently on you. They don't need to be used, they cannot expire, and they're just always there, and they cannot be removed. So essentially, it gives you 4 new equipable slots, which is the 4 utility flasks of your character. So let's break down exactly how good that is. So let's jump in. Alright, so when your flasks are permanently on you, they can't expire, charges don't matter anymore, and nothing like that is relevant. The obvious thing to do is enkindle every single one of them, because there's now no downside to it. And the best mod with enkindling orbs is the newly buffed 70% increased flask effect. Now, another good mod, the prefix Alchemist, is also a good pick. So Alchemist is a prefix which basically means you get 25% increased flask effect, but 35% reduced duration. Well, you don't care because they're permanently on you, giving you a net of 95% increased flask effect with no downside, which is permanently on you. So almost double flask effect, which is super duper good. Now, the bit of a downside with this is that flask effect is additive. So if you're going for a Pathfinder or you're getting a bunch of flask effect on the tree, you're going to get diminishing returns on the enkindling orb and the alchemist mod. So it's not super good to invest further in flasks after you've done so. Now the other downside of the belt is that, you're prohibitive, or you're really heavily encouraged to go for blue magic utility flasks, because those are the ones that are permanently on you. So really, you only have one slot to use for either a life flask or a unique flask. So overall, if you are rocking 3 or 4 unique flasks, that's not going to be the case if you're using this belt, and you're only going to really have one slot, otherwise you'll be wasting the potential. So overall, if you need multiple unique flasks to function, this belt is already out of the running for you. And if you get a lot of your damage from unique flasks, again, it's probably out of the running unless you're willing to give up the damage. Okay, so let's get into it. So flasks can have a base mod. We've already established the prefix, which is going to be Alchemist, but they can also have a suffix, which have also been recently buffed in 3.14 and now, 3.15 and now also in 3.16. So let's take a look at the base mods, which is basically the base, like the Quicksilver or the Bismuth, and the suffixes, and pick out the most powerful ones. So all of these values are going to be multiplied by the flask effect of the enkindling orb and the alchemist, and it's going to be applied to you permanently. So you can see here the Quicksilver is going to grant you 78% movement speed unconditionally. Very, very strong for getting around your hideout, for looting maps, and for getting around maps just in general. To kind of give you guys some comparison, T1 kind of movement speed on boots is 35%. This is 78%, so it's twice as good, over twice as good as a pair of boots. And this is also further multiplied by stuff like Gladiator Challenger charges, as well as Tailwind, so it's actually completely crazy. Next up, we have, the resist flasks. So we got all of them, with the most powerful ones being the elemental resist flasks, as they also have an additional effect that you take less damage of that element from that damage type. So that's incredibly powerful. It's a less damage multiplier. It's essentially elemental fortify, or even better than that. So is it good to have elemental fortify? Absolutely. And it's permanently on you. Incredible defensive potential. In addition to that, we also now have a juiced up Diamond Flask, which is incredibly strong as well. You're easily going to be able to get a ton of crit if that's what you need. And then, of course, we also have evasion, armor, as well as a bit of damage in terms of the mods here. Those are all super duper good, and they're going to be juiced up. You don't want to be using any mods on these flasks which aren't increased by flask effect, because that is the true potential of this belt. The ability to abuse enkindling orbs and alchemists. So basically anything that doesn't get scaled with flask effect is out of the running immediately. So you're not going to be getting phasing, onslaught, or freeze immune from this, which is no good. Okay, so for suffixes, let's pick on the ones which are really powerful here. So of course, you can get 27% increased movement speed from Adrenaline. That is there, which is very strong. You're going to be getting 100% base movement speed. Again, can be multiplied by everything. super powerful. You can get some all res, which can be good as well to round out your res. And you can also get a bunch of immunities, as well as a bit of mana modding if you need that, not too crazy. You can get more crit, but you can also get increased armor and evasion, which is very powerful. Attack and cast speed, very strong as well. You can get life regen, which is really a massive amount of life regen, 6%. That'll come up later in why this is a good belt. You can get basically stun immunity for the most part, rarity, and that's pretty much it. So those are the modifiers that you can get access to. You can pick 4 of the ones in column 1 and 4 of the ones in column 2. So pretty damn strong, 8 mods in total, with a lot of them being incredibly powerful. Overall, it's going to be very, very strong. Imagine an item which had 100% of all elemental res, and also said you take 40% less elemental damage. Is that good? Absolutely. It also had 100% movement speed on it, essentially. 35% increased cast speed and attack speed. All of these are very, very powerful. But there is more things to consider here. At surface, if you don't think about this deeper, you aren't going to understand whether or not this belt is truly worth it. So let's get into the depth of it. So the reality of this is that obviously all these flasks being on permanently is incredibly high utility. It's incredibly good. However, flasks in high juice maps and high density situations, whether that's running 5-ways, simulacrums, high juice maps, just in general, if you've got a fast build, flasks are up a good amount of the time anyway. So let's assume you're not using alchemists or enkindling orbs on any of your flasks. Well, and you have them up 100% of the time. You can get half of the potential of this belt for free anyway, without even using it, just purely from the fact that flasks are just that good anyway. Now, the true value, as I mentioned, comes out of the Enkindling Orb and the Alchemist combo for free with no downside. So in reality, this belt actually reads as having 100% increased flask effect, as well as saying flasks on you are permanent. For the most part, that's the effect it gives, and that's the way you need to think about it. So if we take away the permanent flasks for a second here and assume that you're going to have flasks on you permanently, is 100% increased flask effect for a belt slot good, given the fact that it also restricts the type of flask that you can be using? Well, in certain situations it can be, but overall, not really. 100% increased flask effect, and generally, you can get Alchemist on a lot of your flasks, isn't going to be that good in every situation. So overall, if you've got high flask uptime in some of the situations I described, like in Simulacrum, or in, for example, 5-way farming, or anything like that, or just heavily juiced maps, this belt really isn't actually that insane, because the main gimmick of it, the flask uptime, is really kind of wasted on you, and you're just doubling the effect of your flasks, which, is good, but it's not insane. So that's going to be the first point I make here. And overall, I think that that's going to be one of the big issues with the belt, and one of the reasons people wouldn't use it, because they have good flask uptime already. Now, there is something to be said for consistency though. So when you're running around maps, you're not going to have 100% flask uptime, generally. It's only when you're in the thick of the action, you're blasting a legion or something like that, that you're going to have those perma flasks. So let's say you talk about, looting maps. Well, this belt is incredibly good for looting maps, or getting around the map in general pretty fast. For zooming, for Alchemist maps, this is going to be your pick. 100% movement speed, crazy. Now, the other thing which is good is all the flask effects are permanent. So if we're talking resistances here, could you reliably say, okay, I'm getting, 100% res from my flask, I'm not going to get res capped. You can't do that on a traditional character. You can't rely on your flasks to get res capped. With this belt, you suddenly can, because it's now not conditional. It basically reads as saying it's going to be always on you, meaning you can rely on the belt and the flasks by extension for capping your resistances, meaning you don't have to take resistances on pretty much any of your gear. You can get a ton of resistances if you combine the elemental ones here, for example, alongside the suffix, which gives you a further 78% all res. You can get completely capped on all LE res, which is crazy if you wanted to go down that route. Basically freeing up a massive amount of slots on your armor and your gear. So the reason the belt is so powerful is, of course, the utility of it. The permanent movement speed, the permanent resistances, the permanent armor and evasion. Very, very powerful. Overall, that is going to be the primary selling point. It's going to be freeing up your gear while also giving you the utility and the quality of life permanently. So super duper strong there, and that is going to be the primary thing. Okay, so now that we kind of understand the strengths, we understand the weaknesses, let's get into some of the comparisons, because you're not just giving up your flask. You're not just giving up the unique flask. You're giving up your whole belt slot. And there's one big boy in the belt slot which wants to have a word with us, and that is Headhunter. Okay, so this is the most apt comparison for the belt. So let's take the scenario in which you have 100% uptime on your belt, on your flasks, and you're comparing Mageblood to Headhunter. So we're basically comparing 100% increased flask effect to Headhunter, as well as the flexibility of your character not having to have resistances and stuff like that. Well, okay, let's take a massively juiced up scenario, a 2-man party with an Aura bot doing 5-way legions. Well, it's no contest. Headhunter absolutely dominates it. So you get the resistances from the Aura bot, so you don't need to worry about the conditional resistances. Your gear doesn't have resistances on it anyway. You have the damage, you have the speed, and you have the critical strike for the most part covered. And overall, the belt really doesn't have anything to offer you outside of the 40% less damage taken from Elemental and the evasion and armor. So overall, if you're in any sort of a duo or group scenario where you've got pretty high flask uptime, Mageblood lose by a country mile. Not even close. It gets absolutely dominated by Headhunter overall. Okay, let's give us a new scenario. Let's talk juicing in maps like a Beyond map or a Delhi map. With solo, where you do have to consider your own resistances, where you do have to consider like all of your own quality of life. Okay, let's take an elemental damage attack build, for example, like a tornado shot elemental damage build. Let's make the comparison. Okay, so you can get rid of all of your resistances off your gear, which is a big plus, I'll give them that, and you can not worry about your gear at all. Well, what are you giving up? Well, you're giving up all of your unique flasks, except for one, and you're also giving up the opportunity to gain all of the Headhunter buffs. So if you're an elemental attack-based build, like Tornado Shot, for example, one Headhunter buff, can give you +2 projectiles. That's already Dying Sun from one buff. And that's not even all the mods. It can give you 35% increased attack speed. That's already as good as one mod on one of your flasks. And it's not even one full Headhunter buff right now. It can give you physical damage. It can give you physical damage as extra fire, as the lightning. It can give you basically infinite damage. It's not even a contest. If you're juicing with an attack-based build and you're using any sort of an attack and you're in high kind of mob count content, it's not even close. Headhunter is going to absolutely annihilate the potential of Mageblood. The only upside of Mageblood is defense in this case, as well as consistency of dropping all the resistances of your gear, going full on damage on your gear, like, triple crit multi with life. That's pretty much the only upside of Mageblood, because you're going to have super high uptime on your flasks anyway. You've got the flexibility of the unique flasks. It's just all upside for Headhunter on attack-based builds. Okay. So, Headhunter's won 2 out of 2 right now. If you're mapping solo with an attack-based build with big juice, okay, Headhunter wins. If you're in a duo doing reasonable juice, alright, Headhunter wins. Let's talk about where Mageblood shines. When is it gonna want to be used? Why are people hyping it up so much? Why is it so crazy? Okay, let's take Alk and Go. Low juice scenarios in which you don't have the flasks up most of the time. Let's take that same attack-based build. Low juice scenario, there's not gonna be many buffs to have. Actually, Mageblood now suddenly is very, very good. On average, it's probably going to give you more movement speed, more kind of quality of life, because you're going to be able to make a way better, well-rounded character with the flasks, more defense. It's also going to probably give you potentially more damage, but that's very doubtful. Headhunter buffs are pretty strong. So overall, it's going to give you a much well-rounded character for low juice content, and the power that you're sacrificing isn't as large. So in lower kind of tier content, maybe farming some harvest up, farming up some betrayal, doing some blueprints. For all of this content, the defense is much more valuable. The quality of life of building your character is much more valuable. And overall, Mageblood is going to be way, way stronger, even for attack-based builds. Okay, so overall, Headhunter, high juice and duo, easy win. Low content, low juice, Mageblood, big win. Overall, that's going to be the breakdown. So where does Mageblood truly shine though? Where is its full potential unlocked? Where is it the ultimate item? Well, that is where we're going to get to now. So Mageblood is at its strongest where Headhunter fails to shine. So Headhunter is pretty much a belt based around attack and spell damage. Spell damage kind of hits. If you're not using a physical weapon or physical attack, you lose a lot of damage that Headhunter has to offer. If you're not using an attack which hits in general, like crits or projectiles, you lose even more. If you don't care about how fast your attack speed is, you've pretty much lost everything. There's not really any reason to use a Headhunter. What kind of builds don't care about this stuff? Well, that's damage over time builds. Anything with damage over time doesn't really want to use a Headhunter. Anything with minions doesn't really want to use a Headhunter. In general, supports doesn't want to use a Headhunter. If you were kind of like, yeah, Headhunter, you know, it's okay. I guess I could use one for a little bit of utility or speed. This belt does everything that you wanted from Headhunter way, way better. So what kind of builds are we talking about here? We're talking about Essence Drain Contagion. We're talking about Corrupting Fever Gladiator, Toxic Rain, Caustic Arrow. All of these builds, Righteous Fire as well as another one. All these builds want to use Mageblood for all content instead of Headhunter. And the only downside is that you'll basically be losing a little bit of movement speed. Well, not a little, a lot of movement speed. Maybe a little bit of clear and a whole lot of the health. You'll be losing a whole lot of health. That's pretty much the only downside. Now, what do you gain though? You gain pretty much as much res as you want, all the movement speed, basically everything we've been talking about. So overall, Headhunter is ideal for juicing with attack-based builds, which is primarily going to be what a lot of the end game kind of really high juices are using. So I don't think that Headhunter really is going to be going anywhere. It's probably going to be solid. It's going to be the most used belt probably for the high-end content. And Mageblood is going to be its own niche thing for damage over time builds, which some of those will be very good at juicing as well. Specifically the Corrupting Fever Gladiator, I think, is going to really pop off with Mageblood, as well as, you know, pretty much everyone else. So if you're not dying to use a Headhunter, chances are you're dying to use a Mageblood. That's overall going to be the assessment. All right, so let's move on though to the next part. We've talked about what builds would want it. What builds need it? What does this belt enable? Is it a chase item, a true chase item like Hateforge? Is there any builds that can't function without Mageblood? Well, enter Replica Dream Feather. So Replica Dream Feather is a pretty interesting item. It grants you increased attack damage per armor that you have. And if you'll notice here, there's a ton of armor modification that you can do with the Mageblood belt. And it's non-conditional. You can have it permanently on you and super juiced. So you can get a ton of flat armor and evasion, and also a ton of more multipliers here for your armor and evasion. Okay, so when you combine this with Iron Reflexes, you can convert your evasion into armor and really, really juice yourself up. So one of the builds is absolutely want to use Mageblood is a Replica Dream Feather build, which combines the newly buffed Grace and Determination, and this, if that build is good, will basically be the chase item for that build. As it's super duper rare, and it's something you need for that build to function, it could see quite a large amount of use in that kind of a case. I would probably argue that this is a pretty necessary item for a lot of other builds as well. Like I've put it into my build, for example, and it is super powerful. Basically, any damage over time build is probably going to want to pick this up too. Okay, so let's move on to the scarcity. Let's talk about how much this thing's probably going to be worth. Okay, so this belt, let's assume it's going to be as rare as Headhunter. I think it's a fairly fair assessment because it is just so powerful for the builds that want to use it. Let's talk a little bit about divination cards. So Headhunter is incredibly rare. We're talking, 1 in 10,000 plus Ancient Orbs rare. People gamble on Gwenin, you're pretty much not going to see this at all from the drop table. It's as rare as a mirror, apparently, according to some people. So if Mageblood is that rare, and it doesn't have a divination card to force it through like stacked decks or farming it specifically from maps, it's going to be way rarer than a Headhunter. There's no question about it. And the only way to acquire it will be from randomly dropping it, which as I mentioned, apparently it's going to be as rare as a mirror if it's as rare as Headhunter, or by Ancient Orbing it or Gwenining it. That's pretty much the only ways you can do it. I suppose you can also use Bestiary. So this thing is going to be super expensive and super rare if it is indeed on Headhunter's level. So overall, I expect it to be probably as expensive as Headhunter or a little bit more as the league reaches, kind of maturity and the true price of stuff sets in. I think that the applications of Mageblood are far more like kind of broad, and the people that can use it are far more broad as well. Pretty much any build can use Mageblood. It's going to be pretty damn good. It's going to be better than everything else you can use for the most part, unless you're like using a Vrislatha's Coil or a Coward's Legacy, or if you're a summoner using Darkness Enthroned. Mageblood's probably the pick on pretty much every build that can use it. The only exception is when using an attack-based build and you're super juicing, or you're in a 2-man and you're super juicing. Otherwise, Mageblood is pretty much the pick. So overall, I would say that it's probably going to be incredibly expensive, if not more expensive than Headhunter in the late game. So let's sum it up. Is Mageblood worth the hype? Absolutely, but only if you use it on a build that it thrives on. We're talking stuff like Righteous Fire, you know, getting 40% less fire damage taken, fire cap pretty much off one flask, and then also 6% life regen means you can basically run RF on any ascendancy with no effort. That kind of stuff is build enabling, and it's going to be incredibly sought after. But of course, Headhunter still very much has its place. It's still going to have its throne, and it's still going to be the juicer belt that we all know. Getting, you know, even 10 Headhunter buffs completely outscales Mageblood, especially if you have your Flasks up. That's going to be my conclusion, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'm going to be using Mageblood over Headhunter on my build because it is a dot build. That's pretty much how it goes. I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.